Let's talk a little bit about iron, and stick around to the end of the video and I'll give you a little nuance on top of what we're going to present here. And so iron is something that we need as an essential mineral for our body. Are beans a good source? Is beef a good source? There's a lot of back and forth about how you want to get iron and can you get too much iron. So the role of iron in our body, it has many functions, one of which is to aid with oxygen carrying capacity of our red blood cells. Iron lives primarily in two major places in the body: in the blood in the form of something called hemoglobin, and also in the muscle in something called myoglobin. And so that takes up about 70% of the iron that we have stored in our body. Now, as some of you guys may notice, that when you cut into a steak, you see all this red juice coming out. A lot of people think that's blood. That's actually the myoglobin. So it has a very similar color, but it's not actually blood. And the remainder, the remainder of the iron is bound up in something called ferritin, which is kind of a storage form of iron in the body. Now, without iron, the human body cannot get oxygen to the tissues, which obviously is going to be a problem. One of the other things that's very common, in fact, one of the most common deficiencies in the world, is something called iron deficiency anemia, and that strictly comes from not having enough bioavailable iron in our diets. Symptoms of iron deficiency anemia may include things like extreme fatigue, dizziness, lightheadedness, cold in the hands and feet, headaches, inflammation of the tongue, brittle nails, pale skin, shortness of breath, or even chest pain. And the biggest risk factors for getting anemia are just not eating enough bioavailable iron. Some medications can deplete iron. People that bleed significantly are also at risk for becoming iron depleted. So it's important to get bioavailable iron in the diet. And so let's talk a little about the different types of iron. There's heme iron, which is found in animal source food. Red meat is a wonderful source of heme iron. And then there's a non-heme iron, which is found in many plants and often used as a fortification for certain things like cereals. And so non-heme iron and things like tannins are a problem. So non-heme iron in general can be very difficult to absorb. In fact, there's a study out there that shows that less than 1% of the iron found in beans can be absorbed. And this is due to the high phytic acid and polyphenol content of the beans. Now, once again, tannins that are also in foods can also prevent absorption. And so these tannins will bind up the iron, making it hard to absorb that iron. So it's often advised not to eat highly tannin-rich foods when consuming foods that are giving you your iron. And those things include beer, wine, tea, cider, coffee, chocolate, berries, fruit juice, as well as nuts, seeds, and legumes also will have things like tannins in them. So let's talk about heme iron now. Where can you get heme iron? Well, like as I alluded to, beef, and certainly other meats will have that. Bison, venison, elk, even oysters have it. Mussels and pork are great places to get heme iron. What about supplemental iron in breads and cereals? So you can just do that and you don't need to eat meat. Well, the problem with that is the vast majority of that supplemental iron is made out of literally iron filings, iron shavings. If you want to try something interesting, take a Ziploc bag full of cereal and crunch it up into little pieces, and then take a magnet there and see what happens. You'll see all the iron filings will actually be sucked out of the cereal fragments, and it's quite interesting to see that. And that's not really the best way for us to get iron. In fact, for many people, that can cause quite a bit of stomach issues and gastric problems for that. If you're on a vegan diet, you can get plenty of iron through things like beans and leafy green vegetables and stuff like that. Once again, on paper, if you look at the numbers, you might hit the RDA in iron, but you have to remember, again, we are looking at a number of anti-nutrients that may bind those things up. We have to realize that we are not getting the most bioavailable form. In fact, we may have a hard time getting iron. In fact, many studies that show, particularly in vegetarians, we have more of the data on that because there's just more of them that have been studied, that they are at a much higher risk for things like iron deficiency anemia. So here's another thing on the other thing, if you don't eat liver, you're going to suffer from iron overload. There's some people talking about that you have to have copper from the liver to perhaps balance out the iron, and that doesn't actually turn out to be true in most cases. The problem with iron overload, and there's another sort of genetic form of this called hemochromatosis, which occurs not that infrequently and can cause significant problems, things like joint pain, fatigue, weakness, diabetes, heart failure, loss of sex drive, and abdominal pain. If you suspect you might have these things, you'll check it out with your provider and get confirmed. One of the things that I have seen, and this is some of the nuance behind this, is that When it comes to iron overload and people with hemochromatosis, believe it or not, I've actually seen people go on a carnivore diet and actually improve. It's kind of counterintuitive because you'd think because I'm storing too much iron, if I eat a lot more, I'm going to end up storing even more. Well, actually, as our metabolic health improves, as our insulin sensitivity improves, often we tend to absorb less iron, regulated by a hormone called hepcidin, which is produced in the liver. And that hepcidin will signal to the enterocytes, the cells lining our digestive tract, whether to absorb iron or to hold off on that. That is influenced by our insulin levels. So when our insulin levels are out of whack, a lot of times our iron absorption is out of whack and we overabsorb iron. So anyway, hopefully this has been helpful for you guys. Let me know what you guys think. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the notification bell and share it with somebody you think might be interested in this. All right, we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.